the 7 eternal principles that have stood us in good stead over the last, well, 4, nearly 5 centuries now. It's a very interesting month for me. It's 10 years since I started working for luxury brands. At the time, I was a relatively young professor at London Business School, and I was hired by the world's biggest luxury goods group, LVMH, to start to work with them on various different projects. And exactly 10 years ago, I can remember being told that my first day in Paris would take place on a certain day, and I had to take a certain train from London to Paris. So I had been given no other instructions. I'd been not told which brands I would work on. Would it be Christian Dior? Would it be Louis Vuitton? Would it be Tag Heuer? I was given no data to look at. I was just told to get on a train at 7 o'clock in the morning and go to Paris. And when I arrived in Gare du Nord station, I was picked up by a gentleman straight out of central casting. He had a black suit and a black shirt and a black tie, black sunglasses. He was smoking, which you can't do in Gare du Nord station. And he ushered me into a car and drove me through the streets of Paris for about 20 minutes. Still no explanation as to what I was going to be working on my first ever day for LVMH. And after about 20 minutes, we arrived in a suburb of Paris known as Asnières. And he ushered me into a beautiful house and drove away. And I still had no clue what was going on. It became readily apparent that I was being ushered into the original home of Louis Vuitton. And when Monsieur Vuitton walked from the Jura Mountains to Paris, this was the house that he built and the place where he began his empire. And for the rest of that day, I was asked to sit in his garden, to read some of the books, to walk around the private museum, to touch some of the old bags, to look at the portraits, to sit in his garden, to understand what it was like to be in Monsieur Vuitton's house. And then at 4 o'clock, with no calculations or presentations or analysis, I was picked up by the same guy, driven back to Gare du Nord station, and I was sent back to London. And I had not the faintest clue what on earth was going on. Why would you pay a relatively large amount of money to bring a professor from London Business School and put them in the house of a dead Frenchman for the day? It becomes much clearer as time went on the purpose of that first visit. LVMH, like all good luxury brands, understands, as Monsieur Biver said so well this morning, that you cannot go forward without going backwards. And the message that was sent to me by the leaders that I would work for the next 10 years was very important. Before we look at data, before we look at strategy, before we look at sales, before we look at the different brands, we understand brands. And we understand that brands begin with a man and a place and a time and a moment. And once you understand that, we will move forward. But you cannot move forward without first understanding history. So the first elemental rule of luxury brands is remember your roots. Who was Mr. Procter and Mr. Gamble, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Johnson? We have forgotten, because consumer goods brands have a different approach to branding, one that cleans out the heritage and history and moves forward. In luxury, we always remember our roots. I've been a professor teaching brand management for 15 years, which makes me relatively old these days. The era of brand management, we've had brands for thousands of years, but the process and the study of brand management is really less than 25 years old. It begins with 2 relatively similarly timed events. Professor David Archer began to write many books about the topic, and a small design firm in London called Interbrand began to do valuations of brand. Both took place in the very late 1980s. And we have had brand management for less than 25 years. But the brands of luxury are much older. Many of the brands are more than half a millennia old. And in luxury, we are not better than this approach, but we are certainly different. There are certain concepts that come out of the modern study of brand management. I teach them when I teach my MBA students. Brand equity, differentiation, customer-based associations, intangible asset value, brand awareness, positioning, aspirational branding. They're all very nice concepts, and none of them apply whatsoever to luxury brands. The thing about luxury is we come from the old world and we remember the old ways. These are entirely appropriate concepts for consumer goods and entirely inappropriate for luxury brands. Let me tell you what the word brand means, because too many MBA students and too many marketing professors don't know it. The word brand means fire. It means I burn my mark upon this product. It is the Viking word for fire. It doesn't mean differentiation. It doesn't mean service or satisfaction. It means fire. I burn my mark upon it. With Monsieur Biver this morning, you see a perfect example of a man who burns his name upon things. Yeah? This is what luxury is. We remember the old ways. And the old ways say we burn. So our second concept is linked to that. Understand your DNA. At LVMH for many years, the approach has been to understand each brand's DNA very carefully, and the approach has been copied wholesale by most of the luxury goods companies who fortunately don't understand the concept and its full implications. To understand DNA, let's think about your DNA for a second. Yeah? The genes swimming around your body right now. What do we know about your DNA? Well, first, we know that it's unique. Unless you're a twin, never in the history of the planet has your DNA existed before. Second, you got your DNA from your parents, from your grandparents, from your great-grandparents. We've had it passed down for thousands and thousands of years. Yeah? That's where DNA comes from. It's given to us by our ancestors. Your DNA, as we learn more about it, influences everything. It's the reason you have hairy legs. It's the reason that you prefer dark chocolate. It's the reason you like people with blue eyes. Your DNA drives most of your behavior, as it turns out. And fundamentally, DNA is the reason you are who you are. And the reason we chose the concept of brand DNA to represent luxury brands is very similar. We chose brand DNA because many of the groups of luxury, LVMH has more than 60 brands, the Gucci group more than a dozen, must always remember that while there are synergies within a group, each brand is unique. Monsieur Biver is part of LVMH, and he is very, very different, trust me, from Monsieur Baban, who runs Tag Heuer, another watch brand. There are synergies to be part of a group, but ultimately and first and foremost, there are uniquenesses. DNA teaches us that every brand is unique, and the strategies that work for one brand can never work for another. That is not a synergy. What works for one luxury brand will definitely not work for another, because each has a different DNA. Just as you get your DNA from your parents, our luxury brand gets its DNA from its founders. Occasionally we get lucky, and we have generations who are descending from the founder who keep the genes in their body. Sometimes we do not, but founders drive the DNA. Your DNA is how you behave, and in the same way, when you look at a strong, successful luxury brand, it is also, in every sense of its decisions and activities, driven by the DNA as well. Not just the advertising, but every single approach it takes, all the way up to the selection of the next president or creative director. Fundamentally, DNA is why you are who you are, and fundamentally, DNA is the source of the dream. You cannot speak of luxury and not speak of the dream. The dream is what we sell. We do not sell products. We offer a dream to our clients, and the dream comes from the DNA. The practical business of discovering DNA, of articulating it so a brand can be driven forward, is not always necessary. For brands that are still young, a brand like Marc Jacobs, which has its founder still very much alive and running it, there is no need for articulation. We can let nature take its course. But at some point you must articulate the DNA with growth, with time, with progress. It becomes necessary. And then you reach a very difficult task. You cannot work out the DNA without going to the place, the location. I worked last year for Dom Pérignon. It is impossible to understand Dom Pérignon without going to Haute-Vière and standing in the abbey where the monk Pierre Pérignon first invented champagne. You cannot understand the brand without first going there. Of course, there is the time. If Christian Dior had invented his house in 1937 or 1957, the DNA of the brand would have been different. These elegant, glamorous, superbly feminine gowns were a particular kind of shock to Paris in 1947. This was a city that was on its knees, a time of great austerity. And into that time of great austerity comes Tian Dior and the new look, these beautiful gowns. And the image you see before you is perhaps the most famous of all in fashion. It's the image of a young girl wearing a Dior gown in 1947 in the Pigalle district in Paris, and having that gown ripped from her by two angry old women who were so incensed and angered by the glamour on display in a time of such great austerity that they ripped the gown from her. The point is, Dior has always been provocative. But the key point is it was provocative because it was launched in 1947. Had it been 57, it would have been a different DNA. The creator. I'm sure when consumer goods companies work on their brands, they don't feel it necessary to bring the people in that work in the factories. In the case of luxury brands, it is impossible to do it without speaking to the creators themselves. This handsome gentleman is Richard Geoffroy. He has for 20 years made the magic elixir, which is Dom Pérignon. And you cannot work on the brand of Dom Pérignon without speaking to the man who makes the products. In consumer goods, we have become dislocated. The people who make the products have nothing to do with the people who develop the strategies. Everybody knows the name of the CFO. Nobody knows the name of the artisan who makes the product. It's the wrong way round. The CFO is interchangeable and unimportant and generic. The artisan is important. They should be part of the process. But most important of all, the founder. The DNA of the founder themselves becomes fused with the brand that they create. Their interests, their hobbies, their personality, the colors of the flowers in their garden. We study everything meticulously to understand the brand. And not, in many cases, the image, but the reality. The story of Madame Chanel is not the story of this very beautiful 30-something woman. That's the boring story, very cinematic but boring. It's the story of an old woman in her 60s who comes back after World War II and restores her brand against all the odds. This is the real face of Chanel. This is the true beauty of the house. And the other key point, it has absolutely nothing to do with consumers at all. In my experience, whenever you see a luxury brand talking to clients and consumers about what they want the brand to stand for, disaster will happen next. Make no mistake, luxury brands serve their clients, their consumers, with great humility in every other area. In service, in product, in CRM, we serve our clients well. But the one area that is sacrosanct, the one area where we will not speak to clients if we know what we're doing, is to ask them, what would you like Chanel to be? What would you like Vuitton to stand for this year? We get our DNA from history, from founders. We serve our clients with great humility, but not in this one area. Third, understand your codes. DNA is half the equation, and codes are the other. So, consumer goods brands have logos. They're very important. Luxury brands are older. They're more creative. They're richer. They go beyond the logo to what we call codes. They have a much richer symbolic vocabulary. Let me share with you some codes, and you have to shout out what they are, okay? Let's test CEIBS' current luxury sensibilities. Some are easier than others. This code you recognize. Anyone? Dom Pérignon, good. How about this code? Ladies? Christian Dior, thank you. Louis XV. This one? Hermes. This one? Very good. Just a color, see? How about that one? Not Hermes, different color. You're 2 pixels off. Veuve Clicquot, excellent. Final one. Le Corso Rosso, the Ferrari red. The point is these are much richer and easy to identify for clients who know the brands well. It's beyond the logo. Some of the great luxury brands, we could take Chanel, we could take Dior or Hermes, would have a dozen codes, which if presented to a client, would instantly be recognized as being part of the brand. What is the purpose of a code? There are 2 main purposes of a code. The first is, that's how we get our value from communications. The dirty secret of luxury is most badly run luxury brands waste billions on advertising. Generic, boring, pointless advertising devoid of codes. And then there are the few, the exceptions, those like Hermes, that use codes. I love this ad. You can learn more from this ad than about 12.5 months studying luxury brand management. This ad is a masterclass in how to use codes. Every single pixel in this print ad for Hermes is a code. From the tacking at the back, from the whip in her hand, from the black and the white contrast, from the horse, from the balduc, from the particular red color of the ribbon. It is all 100%, every single pixel, part of Hermes. We use our codes, if we know our codes and we know what we're doing, to get the most impact from our communication. The top 5%. The rest waste their money with generic and pointless advertising. But the ones that know their business use codes to signal their brand. And the other, more important use of codes is a magic trick. Literally a magic trick. So the question and the challenge of luxury brands is always the same. How do I convince a beautiful 25-year-old Shanghaiese girl that a brand that is 300 years old is the most fashionable and the most up-to-date brand in the world? How do I convince a handsome 45-year-old Chinese entrepreneur that Dom Perignon is the ultimate in modern luxury when it's more than 3 centuries old? And the answer is, I use my codes. I play a magic trick. I take a code, like the monogram of Vuitton, and I bring in a pop artist from Japan, Takeshi Murakami, and I say, play, change. And what you see before you is a magic trick. It's the same, but it's different. It's old, but it's new. It's past, but it's present. It's tradition, and it's modernity. And it's the way that a luxury brand maintains freshness while still being true to heritage. In the case of Hermes, I literally take out a print ad and I say to my clients, this season we go to India. It's the same, it's the horse, but for this season it will be the elephant. It's different. It's France, it's India. It's the 17th century, it's the 21st century. It's the past and it's the future. Yeah? It's a magic trick. Consistency and modernity. In the case of Burberry, it's a British brand. It only has a few codes. The check is the most important one. We don't change the check. Instead, we take it from an expected place, the inside of a Japanese businessman's Macintosh, and we put it onto the beautiful bust of Kate Moss. Yeah? It's the same, but it's different. It's the past, but it's the present. It's old, and it's new. In the case of Dom Perignon, we bring in Mark